Namarjova, hello, thank you very much. On behalf of the Mies van der Rohe Foundation, we wish to thank the Biennial of Architecture in Tbilisi for this invitation to share with you all our experience here in the Barcelona Pavilion on ephemeral architecture and heritage and projects such as the European Union Prize for Contemporary Architecture, Mies van der Rohe Award. This award was begun in 1988, already with the support of the European Commission, and more specifically with the framework program called Creative Europe, which supports the creative industries of culture and audiovisuals. And it also supports the Tbilisi Biennial and also other essential programs such as the Future Architecture Platform, in which both the Biennial and ourselves, Fundación Mies van der Rohe, participate with a great team of institutions and of friends. What do we have in common? This is the question that we are posing more than ever in the current situation and which the Tbilisi Biennial 2020 raises. The Barcelona Pavilion stands in the city as part of its natural urbanscape, a public space in the mostly green area of Montjuïc, a meeting point of the many strolls that people take in this hill of the city. We can consider that we are moved by ancient constructions because we are connected to one another by things deep within us that transcend time and place, and these things are commonalities. The Barcelona Pavilion is only 91 years old, but it has transcended time and place, and it produces a similar effect to that of a Roman theater, a medieval construction, or a Renaissance palace. Places such as these give an essential role to the individual and its relationship with others, in contraposition to how many have understood the modern movement and its systematized way of living possibilities. The Barcelona Pavilion, far from a systematized tool, produces rich behaviors that fall outside conventional categories, and many architects, musicians, painters, dancers, poets, sculptors, and people interested and curious to understand and know more about the Barcelona Pavilion and its influence in our lives have transformed it in many different ways, using all kinds of materials: stone, glass, steel, plastic, sound, light, water, even milk, and delving into those aspects of our lives that in a certain way allow the commonness which makes us feel that this place has always been in and with us, a pavilion of reflection. We are talking about a pavilion that was built as an ephemeral structure in 1929 and as a perpetual one in 1986. And therefore, I will share the contradictions that working with a place like this, designed to last in memory and photos and plans, but not physically, has, while also being part of the world's social heritage. It was during the period of non-existence beyond the archives of Mies van der Rohe in Berlin and Chicago, and later at the MoMA, that two exhibitions took place. One in 1932 presented the pavilion as part of a historiography of the international style, and later in 1947, another exhibition in which the pavilion was part of a chronology of Mies van der Rohe's works up till then. The pavilion always appears in black and white, and with a fairly discreet presence, the result of talking about it without sufficient critical time distance in the 1932 exhibition, and in the other one without the experience of physically visiting what had existed previously, creating an incomplete but powerful story. The 1929 pavilion was built in the context of an international exhibition, surely one of the international events that is most characterized by ephemeral architectures and that becomes the attraction of crowds that have a particular experience of architecture, either as passive or active participants. I mean visitors, but also all those involved in the construction, cleaning, communication, and the consequences of the exhibition at city level, where all these people live. These exhibitions continue being events of spectacle, but also industry and technology, the construction of an ephemeral city that, although it subsequently leaves some construction standing, these will never again have the same intense relationship with the people. And in reality, this point of temporality remains the same that we often discuss about with any work of architecture that physically lasts over time and that changes in terms of use, its context, impact, and interest. It is in this context of an ephemeral exposition that the spaces representing the German industry appear, designed by Ludwig mies van der Rohe and Lili Reyk, together with the pavilion that represents Germany's Weimar Republic as a whole. It is interesting to remember these images, always in black and white, to take into account how some people dressed, how the car industry looked like, the decoration with flowers in pots that filled the pavilion, and the contrast with other architectures, such as the Victoria Eugenia Palace, that could have also have disappeared after the exhibition. Mies explains how, upon receiving the commission, he did not know very well what the authorities meant by designing a temporary pavilion. The only thing he was asked was not to use too much glass. Remember, however, that in addition to the pavilion representing Germany, it also represented its industries, and specifically that of steel, glass, stones, and textiles, and as Laura Martínez de Guereño recently reminded us, it was part of a tour that, as a starting point, led visitors to see all the spaces representing Germany and of which we only have photographs and plans of all of these places. In the 1950s, there was the exchange of letters between architect Oriol Bohigas and Ludwig mies van der Rohe to rebuild the pavilion. The pavilion had already transcended what it had meant at the time of its physical existence, and we could say that it had become almost a myth in the imaginary of people, enhancing this will to rebuild it. At that moment, there was the interest of building an architectural, historiographical story in the city of Barcelona, where a key piece of the international modern movement from before World War II of the importance of the pavilion was physically lacking, and at the same time the desire to transform the city, despite the difficulties of the dictatorship, with movements such as that of Group R. And it is an absolutely different context, that of the change from a dictatorship to another governing model, that of an illusion of change and improvement with the Olympic Games on the horizon, that the 1986 pavilion appears. I have said before, a new perpetual pavilion, but maybe I like better the simile with perennial, which gives the possibility of change and also the physical death of the building. The aim is to build a pavilion from the existing documents in the exact same place, using the visible materials with the utmost precision, but changing the invisible parts and materials, such as steel, so that they can last over time and consequently that the building can be maintained. The Barcelona of the Olympic Games is different from that of the International Exhibition, but there is a certain shared communal enthusiasm to conquer the city again, beyond economic and political interests. It is a time when the city of public spaces, parks, infrastructures, and buildings that will endure rise in parallel with social movements. Culture, a common essential good, becomes a key piece to understand the progress of Barcelona, Catalonia, and Europe. This more than 30 years ago. Rapidly, after its reconstruction, the pavilion is declared an element of national heritage importance. It's called a BCIN. Hence, I will be speaking of ephemeral interventions in heritage. But I also want to highlight that everything that has happened and continues to happen in the pavilion is certainly possible because it is not the original building, but a copy. To visit many buildings of that time, protective shoes are required. One cannot touch anything, and the possibility of filling it, for example, with milk and coffee would be out of the question. The 1986 pavilion is almost 35 years old, but we did not know if at some point in the future it could be considered with a different heritage level, which does not allow some of the activities that currently take place in it. These images are from the film Pont de Varsovia, Warsaw Bridge, by Pere Portabella from 1989, part of which was shot in the pavilion. It is a critical, anti-narrative film with very powerful images, and in it we find a political and social critique of the time, and what I find most interesting is the willingness to use the pavilion to show the vacuity of a certain intellectuality and bourgeois values. We find a circle of intellectuals, writers, editors, and professors talking about the divine and humane, and in the pavilion, the most accurate criticism is about the poor quality of this finger food that you're seeing. It is in this context that we also find an artistic intervention. The pavilion is already in Portabella's imaginary, remember in 1989, a meeting place where artistic transformations play an important role in an architectural masterpiece. With the reconstruction of the pavilion and its opening to everybody, it was already implicit that this should be a place of debate and dissemination and divulgation. And it was born based on three basic programs that remain to this day: research on the modern movement, the EU Meso Award with the European Commission, and a debate and deepening of curiosity through ephemeral interventions. Three programs that we have been seeing actually go in parallel, but not that much, and they feed each other. And that is why, or what this image is showing. Those who have worked with the pavilion have done so as a result of direct invitations, competitions, or proposals received that have been considered to provide an interesting insight of the pavilion, and with a goal from the beginning to engage with all those people who have an interest in culture, which is nothing more and nothing less than what affects us in our day-to-day. Before I talked about scientific dissemination in professional spaces, such as this biennial of Tbilisi, and on the other hand, divulgation with general audiences to interact with those who start from different knowledge references, but maybe not so specific on architecture. And that includes the neighbors of Barcelona, but also those of all the world, where social networks play an important role. I have grouped some of the interventions and projects according to the topics that they have dealt with, and you will see that the heritage of the pavilion itself and also the social and cultural heritage of the city are claimed with a worldwide impact. One of the topics where art and research converge is that of archives. There have been different readings about the pavilion in its built states and in its states as plans and photographs stored in archive. Muntadas worked with the smells. Jordi Bernadó here reminded us that the pavilion was thought without doors, and Laura Martínez de Guereño has allowed us to see the showcases that Mies and Reich designed in 1929 following the result of the Lily Reich Grant for Equality in Architecture. The pavilion has also been looked at from its maintenance and image point of view. The famous precise photograph by Jeff Wall and the case of Phantom by Andrés Jaque, who brought to light everything that is necessary for the pavilion every day to present itself as if time had not passed. Forgotten stories have also played a prominent role, as in the case of workers from factories such as La Maquinista who lived in neighborhoods such as La Mina, story highlighted by Dennis Adams. Dumenac here reminded us about the workers who made the transformation of the city possible in 1929 and who lived on the same mountain of Montjuïc, forgotten and hidden from the rest of the city. In this case, we also find the topic of commonness through remaining ephemeral pavilions which were used in different ways by people who needed a home. In Barcelona, there is the example of the Belgium Pavilion from 1929 and the Palace of Missions, where hundreds of people lived, solid structures that were used temporarily, and at the same time, the construction of shanty towns, which in principle should have been temporary, but which did not have a defined lifetime, and that had to be adapted. In the most recent case of Laercio Redondo, the use of sound, silk, and monochromes has permeated the pavilion with a series of images that cannot be seen easily or clearly, the layers of history and how these are explained through different narrations. We have these silk elements in which we can find photographs from 1929, photographs from today, and in between there is the story and how it has been explained, or these photos that, depending on how we look at them, how we see them, depending on the sunlight, depending on many different elements, we can see them in one way or another, or hardly see them at all. Katarzyna Krakowiak's proposal used sound with voices from hundreds of people from all over the world who have filled the pavilion during the summer months with the ever-present COVID, and with the intention of sharing a space that is currently not visited by many visitors. And in each case, we have photographs and videos that explain in very particular ways, sometimes the point of view of the photographer and filmmaker, and in others that of the artist, what cannot last in time, but that instead has the will to last, at least in some kind of format. one of the recurring themes when rethinking the pavilion is its materiality. In this sense, Iñaki Bonillas changed the color of the light of the skylight of the pavilion, introducing the pink color, something that made this element that usually gives a feeling of lightness or hardly existing at all become heavy, as in the architecture of Barragan. Another example that, as I said, goes far beyond materiality, but that has it implicitly, is Mia's Missing Materiality by Anna and Eugenie Bach.
Altogether,
in this case, beyond the girl who on inauguration day, while playing in the square in front, asked if this was going to be a new Apple store, it was an intervention that, due to the short time that it was visitable, also had a strong impact on networks and created a very interesting debate there. By the way, I have not talked about the limits of what can be done in the pavilion as a heritage building. And this is perhaps a good opportunity to see that the ideas that are received are the ones that always prevail. And then we find the ways to make them viable. Tests are always carried out to ensure that the pavilion materials are not damaged. In the case of Mia's Missing Materiality, the sheets of white plastic that you're seeing here, which by the way we'll see that they had a new life afterwards, did not carry glue, but a bonding that left no stain on any of the materials that they covered. Once again, the video, in this case by Adrià, allows us to have a documentary document of the mounting and dismantling, and although the experiences will never be that of having been there, the power to highlight those topics that most interested the authors, such as the essential role of the pavilion materials in the richness of the lived experience, or how certain elements appeared, such as the presence of the landscape framed by the walls and the roofs, or the strong visibility of the presence of people when moving through the space. In this case, the pavilion was converted into a space and not a place. All these things were tackled. This video also has sound, and it consists of the words of Johanni Palasma and his opinion on the proposal. Words that are heard more than understood, as if this uniform and hygienist veil had also passed over these words, and that also highlighted the role of images in the imaginary that we create about what no longer exists.
And poor, perhaps, in its articulation. The modernists used the notion, particularly Le Corbusier, about the truth of the eye, and whiteness was supposed to reveal the truth. One interesting aspect is that the white pavilion reverses the normal design process, because architects very often in the early phase of design make white models. I immediately felt that this is an extraordinary project, and I'm sure will also evoke a lot of conversation.
together with the importance of materiality and its possible fragility and possibilities, there are also proposals that have to do with the reflections created by glass, the polished stones, and the pieces of steel. In the case of Kazuyo Sejima and Ryue Nishizawa, Sanaa, they work on this topic by introducing an element absolutely alien to the pavilion, the spiral of Mesacrylate, which created a space within a space and repeated it infinitely, at the same time that it held up almost magically, like the pavilion itself. It was possible to reflect on the role of materials and the expected effects and those that are not in architecture. The usual question about whether Mies had already taken into account many of the reflections that we see when we are visiting the pavilion and which were repeated, as I was saying, with this new element that was put there. In the case of Ai Weiwei, he worked with perishable materials, milk and coffee, which were changing at every moment, not leaving the same image at any time, as they were degrading from minute one and at a fairly fast speed. When coming in contact with the travertines, marbles, glass, and steels, a different image of the reflections of the pavilion was offered, and it highlighted the role of water, the material that is continuously changed, either because it gets dirty or because it evaporates. This constant change of material from the pavilion was what interested Ai Weiwei and led him to make this proposal that, if it had been for him, he would have even pushed the limits further, and he would have made it last more than the 3 weeks that it took place, and the milk would have become a substance that would very hardly relatable to milk. However, the intervention took place in December, taking advantage of the cold. In some other cases, the heritage of the modern movement and Mies has been understood as part of a research on Mies's work globally and not specifically in the pavilion, or of personal works and strategies by artists that have been applied to the pavilion to see how they work or the effect that they have, and of which we see some examples in these images. Here, for example, the historic garden of Ryoanji in Japan is moved to Barcelona. The aesthetics in all these interventions have a fundamental role as well. Photograph of the pavilion and photography and the pavilion have also had a long and close relationship. We have already seen Jeff Wall's photo, but also many photographs by different people who have captured this place in very different ways. And surprisingly, we still find new aspects that we did not even know about. Jerome Slomoff transformed the pavilion into a camera obscura in 1996 and took a series of photographs where the machine or camera was the pavilion itself, a space of light and transparency where walking does not find obstacles, became for a few hours an impenetrable space where only through a small hole one achieved this relationship between the interior and the outside, a hole that also framed a very clear image, almost as in one of those photomontages by Mies, and that then afterward became a photograph, developed in the same space of the pavilion, which was converted into a laboratory, a lab of experimentation, we could also say. These are some examples of the photos that were shot from and within the pavilion. More recently, Michael Vesely, using a camera built by himself, took this photograph with a single shot, here it is, that lasted 365 days and that captures what happens in the pavilion. Above all, we detect the movement of sunlight in the far end over there of the image. The geometry of Mies's architecture and the work with light have also been important. In fact, in the last 2 years, the foundation has been able to collaborate with this festival called Barcelona with proposals that use light to highlight different aspects of the pavilion. In this case, what we are seeing over here by Lufberg and Iker Giel also took place in the Farnsworth House. and therefore the geometry which is formed by the joints of the stones on the horizontal and the vertical plans have a continuity, and they then mix up also with the continuity of the joints from other sides of the pavilion, and not only lines or points as you're seeing appear, but also horizontal planes that appear through the addition of smoke. The pavilion's furniture and its rethinking was done by Sabine Marcellis, who used glass to produce lamps, the chaiselong, and the fountain, a way also to share the pavilion with different audiences, and that started with Josep Kedglas's book, Fear of Glass, and where Sabine said, no fear of glass. Kedglas being one of the great detractors of the reconstruction of the pavilion, together with Alison Smithson. The columns that you're seeing here were built for the 30th anniversary of the reconstruction. And to explain this relationship with the industry at the beginning of the 20s and the current effect that this industry has today on our planet. Here we see how the columns, which were not on top of the pavilion but in front as they had been originally, tried to dignify this somehow degraded public space that exists between the Magic Fountain and the Barcelona Pavilion, and how people, in this case this girl with the bicycle, used it as a way to understand the possibilities that public space gives to us when elements, which can be temporary such as these, appear. Speaking of ephemeral interventions, most of our actions are ephemeral, and their commonness needs to be resilient. How we move, how we relate to other people, to objects, the conversations that we have. And for centuries we have wanted to capture some of these situations through paintings, writings, and later on photography and video. And most of these documents have become heritage at present. The fact of walking through the pavilion by each one of us becomes a personal way to relate to it, and a way that we will probably never again repeat. The piece by Enric Llurach and Félix Pastor, that later resulted in this brilliant video by 15L Films, explains what I mean with this dancer who lives in a supposedly free way her visit among the stones, glass, steel, water, furniture, and light of the pavilion. These ways of walking that will never be repeated in the same way, and then make the experience richer and sometimes give the answer to the usual question of why doesn't this ephemeral intervention stay? Precisely because these are parts of reflection exercises that should give rise to other new results. They must have a limited time to continue reflecting or allowing this continuous reflection on the proposed topics that we have been seeing. The sounds that we hear in the video, the pavement, the woman's dress, the hairstyle, everything will vanish, will be ephemeral after a certain moment. But we are tempted to kind of solidify or freeze them as if it were almost a fetishistic action. In addition to the photographs, videos, and publications that collect part of the written debates, artists are also asked to leave a piece that can somehow explain what has taken place. You're seeing some of the images here. In the case of Andrés Jaque's Phantom, there has even been a collaboration to expose a result of his intervention in Chicago with the critical conversations. Here you're seeing the image that I have had with some people about this very same fact and the meaning or sense that it can have. I also find very interesting we could say perhaps contradictory exhibition of ephemeral architectures from the pavilion with all these elements that we saw previously that we presented in Logroño within the framework of the Concéntrico Festival, which is precisely about ephemeral interventions in this in the public space of this Spanish city. In a similar way, the European Union Prize for Contemporary Architecture, Mies van der Rohe Award, has been for over 30 years bringing people together to understand the role of architecture and the specific features of a series of projects that, through different filters, are considered key places to understand the role, the importance of architecture if we want to continue improving the way we live. These are images of the jury discussing. Once they receive a series of works which have, as I said, already passed a series of other filters, a jury which is formed by architects in practice, others which are critics, sociologists, politicians, all kinds of people involved in architecture. And we're seeing the 5 finalists, such as this auditorium in Plasencia, this town 3 hours from Madrid, which has allowed a certain part of the natural heritage, we could say, of the city to be preserved by building this building there. Or the PC Caritas in Melle, near Brussels, which allowed this building to stay and to transform it and give it new uses for the psychiatrical clinic. Or the Low Block in Berlin, by constructing different spaces of different proportions, it allows the people to use it in many different ways, such as these terraces that you're seeing over here. Or the transformation of the Skanderbeg Square, transforming it or changing its use by cars to giving it to people and also empowering people in its use, for example, with this subtle section of the pyramid in which a higher level gives a new relationship to the neighboring buildings. And the winners, for example, here we're seeing images of the Bordeaux project, which transformed 3 huge blocks from the late 60s and improved in a very, very important way the lives of people. And we should not forget either the school, which won the Emerging Prize between in a small rural town between Toulouse and the Pyrenees. Something which is always difficult for the jury is to decide who's the winner, but together with the winner and the finalist and the decisions that are taken, there's this whole group of projects that make us understand a little bit better what has happened in terms of architecture, of transformation of the European territory in the last 2 years. And this also creates an archive, like we were saying before, films or interviews, models, objects, photographs, and drawings that are also archived, which open up the possibility of organizing discussions and events of all kind, publications such as the Atlas, which brought together all the works up till 2015, the organization of exhibitions from different points of view and also using different materials, sometimes in museums where people have to go, and sometimes taking all these elements outside and opening them up to whoever is interested, like we're seeing over here. And so bringing all these discussions that sometimes we have around, but we're not aware of them in a different way, so that we are more aware that a specific building is there or that public space has been transformed. Elias Engeli said that the Barcelona Pavilion is a complete lesson in architecture. It is palimpsest, since its logic grows naturally from the traces of what was there. It is paradigm, since its rhetoric broke with the established conventions to become emblematic of modernity and iconoclast to the extent that it refutes the redundant, in this case the overload of modernist moralism, so that it restores to architecture its simplest logic, confrontation between itself and its iconographic rhetoric, recognized by our experience, where it is automatically transformed and redeemed. We recognize it as a great work of art and a paradigm of beauty. And for this to continue, these transformations are essential, and we can better understand why the pavilion is a place of commonness, which is what you can also see on the webpage of the Tbilisi Architecture Biennale. COVID-19 is generating a devastating storm of adverse social and economic impacts within the cultural sector worldwide. It is of utmost importance and urgency that substantial attention, means, and resources are given to the cultural sector and to cultural relations worldwide. What we have in common in Europe is the will for a democratic, free, and sustainable society. What we have in common is an attitude towards certain things, and in European architecture, this means how we, as people, live, how we use public space, how competitions improve the quality of our environment, how the layers of history enrich us, the quality of universal healthcare, and the support of public institutions to culture. You can find more information on all these projects on biennial.ge and misbcn.com. And we hope you enjoy all this archive of European commonness. We also hope that very, very soon we can meet here in Barcelona and in this great place of the Barcelona Pavilion. Thank you very much.